Public Advocate Jumaane Williams. I would like to introduce our speaker, Public Advocate Jumaane Williams. Jumaane is a first-generation Brooklynite of Grenadian heritage. He attended Philippa Schuyler Middle School for the Gifted and Talented and Brooklyn Technical High School, then earned his bachelor's and master's degree from Brooklyn College. After graduating, Jumaane began his career as a community organizer by serving as the assistant director for the Greater Flatbush Beacon School, then later as the executive director of New York State Tenants and Neighbors, where he fought for truly affordable, income-targeted housing across the city and the state. In 2009, he began his career as an activist elected official in New York City Council. I welcome Public Advocate Jumaane Williams. Thank you for joining.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum to everyone. The peace and blessings to you. Thanks for having me today. Just one slight, it's actually Jumaane, but a lot of folks say Jumaane, so no problem.
Thank you.
No problem.
Sorry for the mispronunciation. I appreciate it.
Yep.
And also, I have my co-host Mossab Said, and we will ask a few questions. Also, I welcome Mossab Said.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Glad to be here. And I also hate to be that guy, but it's Sadia. But don't worry, you're good. It's okay. I'm sure we all mispronounce each other's names.
All the time, yeah. Happens all the time.
Yeah, that is the one beauty about New York City. A lot of international and different cultures. It is a great fabric. We will ask a few questions. I'll ask perhaps 3 questions, and my brother, my co-host, will also ask the other 3 questions. First of all, we really appreciate for accepting our invitation. As Turkish Americans and Muslim Americans, we stand with our fellow African American citizens in terms of racism and all the problems, and we support our brothers in these protests against the police brutality and systematic racism. And perhaps I will get started with the first question. Please feel free to interrupt, brother, my co-host, to contribute as you see fit during the conversation. We as Muslim Americans facing racism in every level of society, such as work, street, and school. What actions can you do for us to reduce racism, xenophobia, and Islamophobia from top to bottom for us?
You know, our society, unfortunately, is based on privilege, and a lot of that privilege has an overlay of racism, xenophobia, Islamophobia. And one, we just have to be honest about that and call it out every time it happens. I try to do that. And, you know, we have to make sure people, to the best of their ability, because human beings do this, but stop separating each other unnecessarily. And so what does it mean to be Muslim? What is a Muslim? They're Americans. You know, they're teachers, they're firefighters, they're lawyers, they're janitors, they're cab drivers, they're doctors, they're everybody, they're all of us. And we had actually a Zoom call where we had elected officials across the state that were Muslim, and a lot of folks didn't know, because what does a Muslim look like? What is a typical, stereotypical person that you're thinking of? And that's not what that is. And so there's, with 6 million Muslims in this country, it's one of the fastest growing religions. And we should just educate people what it is and what it's not. And most of this stuff is based on ignorance and fear, which is a terrible mix. And so we want to continue to work with and support those organizations on the ground that are trying to uplift the beauty of Islam and understanding, you know, if you believe in a monotheistic God, Christian, Judaism, Islam, it's the same monotheistic God that people are worshiping. So that's the first step. And the second step is to support legislation, policies, and resources to those community groups that are doing the work on the ground, so that community has the same connection to government and resources that people need to live the best life that they can.
Yeah, that is really great. There's a lot of work on our shoulder as Muslim Americans and Turkish Americans to introduce ourselves to the other communities. They really don't know who we are, and what type of personalities, what type of cultures we have, and hearing this from our officials as well, and seeing the support and seeing that hand is being extended towards us, towards Muslim Americans, is really great and really appreciate. And perhaps the second question will be, we see the racism from law enforcement are straightforward, clear in the recent incidents that we lost several of our African American fellow citizens. What about the other type of hidden discrimination at higher level, from even like our current president, the speeches that he gives in rallies that fuels white supremacy? What promises do you make to prevent, so all Muslims, Hindus, and all other minorities, we all live in peace and harmony all together? Like even applying for an apartment or applying for a job, there are a lot of angles to discrimination, and we really don't face these, and we are not able to discover those type of racism. What can you do for us?
You know, the President of the United States, you know, a supporter of neo-Nazism, he's a bigot, he's Islamophobic, he's every ism you could think of. The only thing that's really missing is a white hood and a copy of Mein Kampf. And I'm not even sure if he's hiding that anymore. So we're at a pretty dark time in the country. We are the light to help guide us through it. And I believe, and I walk with the Most High myself. So I believe that with our, you know, focus and our works, our faith will be made real. Excuse me, it will be made real as we move forward through this darkness. So that's one. But you know, in the book I read, it said faith without works is dead. So we have to continue to work toward what it is that we want to see done. And as you mentioned, one of the issues with law enforcement is that they're asked to do everything in society. Wherever society fails, they send police to fix it, and that's a big problem. And just now, the budget is being passed in the city, and we did a move we've never done before, trying to block that from happening, because that same thing is happening in the budget. We are cutting everything except police, where we're actually adding additional police. That doesn't make any sense. And so we have to redefine what public safety is and what law enforcement's role is in that. And you have to have courageous people who will do that. We also have to remember that there are the people like Donald Trump and the folks who follow him that are outwardly just describing who they are and who the people is they hate. And it's the everyday institutions that have the microaggressions. And I always remind folks, you don't have to be a bigot, a racist, or Islamophobic yourself to push these institutions forward that have such breadth of bigotry in their structural DNA. Now, you might be a racist or Islamophobic. I never take that off the table completely. But I just always say, you don't have to be that. You can just be doing nothing and let these systems move forward. And so when you think about after 9/11, how Muslim Americans and Muslim New Yorkers were treated in this city, it was astonishing. And the type of surveillance that was done in the Muslim community, where they didn't even get a lead, much less anything else, makes no sense. And so we have to call that out as much as we can whenever we see it. Sometimes that's difficult because it's based on fear and everybody wants to feel safe. That includes Muslims who live here. And we have to work with every community and everyone because everybody wants to feel safe and provide a better world for the children than they had.
Yeah, thank you. And I see you join with the protesters to defund the police forces, and yeah, that is really great to see our leaders in these protests as well. You know, recently with the COVID, we see a lot more value for the healthcare and hospital system, and our hospital system pretty much collapsed, and we could not handle the load. What changes do you propose for our healthcare system that all of us can have easy access to universal healthcare?
I believe in universal healthcare, and I believe in healthcare for all. You know, public safety is a thing that we have to look at much differently. The communities that have access to quality healthcare, quality mental health care, quality and affordable housing, quality educational systems, the ability to work and have a pay that can help them afford healthy food, which hopefully is easily accessible, public safety looks a lot different. And health is a huge part of that. We saw the people disproportionately affected with COVID the way we did because they didn't have access to healthcare even before that. And even as COVID came in, the structures that were there were fully ignored. Sadly, we're seeing cuts in many areas, including healthcare and what's made accessible. And where we're seeing increases is in our police department. And that's an unfortunate message that we're looking like we're getting ready to send the city of New York.
Yeah, that's really great. I will hand perhaps some time to Brother Mosab to ask several other questions.
Yeah, so I'm gonna mix up the order here a little bit because I think the conversation is going in that direction. So
No worries.
like you mentioned that COVID kind of showed us who actually gets affected by these crises and who bears the brunt of, you know, pandemics and public health crises. So how does it relate to structural systemic racism or the effects of the pandemic? How does that relate to structural systemic structural systemic racism? Like, could you elaborate more on the effects that it has had on working class, people of color, Black people, you know, in what you've seen in the line of your work?
Well, in so many ways, especially here in New York, I'm always clear on the mayor, the governor, and the president. We had 3 cisgender straight white men making decisions that affected communities that look nothing like them, and they did a terrible job at it, especially at the beginning. We're in a place now where I think it's better. Hopefully they learn from the lessons as we sadly look like we're going through a second wave. But at the beginning, it was just horrific, and there was a human cost to it. So we knew certain communities came in with the comorbidities that they were speaking about. We knew there were certain communities that needed more attention. Not only did they got more attention, they got no attention. NYCHA, which is public housing, was only discovered, I guess, by the mayor and the governor maybe about 6 weeks in. The good thing they did is really fight for resources from the president and federal government, but what they did with them made no sense. And so they took a long time to shut down the city, which we never got a full shutdown. But they were slow to act, they weren't bold, they didn't adapt to data. So we never closed the city fully, and we never moved even for the pause order, which was weak, fast enough. And then we did even worse. The governor said, and the mayor, we're gonna have a work from home, telecommute. Well, there's a very small subsection of people who can actually telecommute. And they usually don't have the most melanin in their skin, and they're more affluent and have the jobs that they can telecommute. So those folks did telecommute. And sadly, what happened to everybody else, they were told that they were essential workers. They were told that you can't telecommute, you have to go to work. 75% of essential workers in New York were Black and brown and immigrant communities. This is just a reality. Not only were they told that you have to go to work, they were told you have to go to work with no PPEs. We're not going to give you any personal protective equipment because we don't have it. Not only they were told they have to go to work with no PPEs, they were told you have to go to work with no PPEs, and we're not going to test the communities that you live in. And so for many weeks, 25 of the top 30 zip codes that were testing were white and wealthy, where the people were getting this disease were Black, brown, and immigrants. And we're seeing the results of that. The disease doesn't discriminate. So we lift up every community and every socioeconomic status that is suffering and dealing with this trauma. But we have to lift up the communities that were disproportionately affected and be real about that. And they were affected as a direct result from the executives in this city and the state, particularly the governor, who asked for and received unprecedented amounts of executive authority. So while he's claiming victory now, we had some of the highest rates of corona and death on the planet because of the actions of those two people and the inherent structural racism and bigotry that exists when we make decision making and exists in the structures that we have.
Yeah, and I think to move the conversation forward, you mentioned the NYPD budget earlier in the conversation. I just wanted to ask you, how would you see investment in communities? How does defunding the police look like? You know, I think you've heard Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez with her answer earlier, I think it was 2 weeks ago, when she said, you know, that's just the suburbs, right? It's not an outwards theory that doesn't exist. It's there. It's just, you know, look at the suburbs, and that's how defunding the police looks like. So I'd like to hear how you think community investment looks like, and what does defund the police mean and look like to you?
And I embrace, you know, the hashtag defund the police. What I don't want to get caught up is people getting confused by the words. So whether it's defund the police, divest, reinvest, all that to me means the same thing. It means in the city and really across the state and the country, the departments that take care of law enforcement are so large, often at the expense of other things. And as I mentioned, we have to redefine and reimagine what public safety is. We have to stop equating public safety with equaling to police. We have to look at all, and I'm always one to say law enforcement has a role in public safety, but it's not the only role. And if we don't address the other things I spoke about, education, housing, health, access to health, jobs, we tried to cut every single summer youth job that exists in the city of New York. We went from 75,000 youth jobs to 40,000, but we added more police. And so it makes no sense. And what we were saying is, okay, let's not fire anyone. But if we're not hiring any municipal employees at all, why are we hiring additional police officers? We're trying to send a message again that in order to keep safe, we don't have to do these other things. All we have to do is keep police. And that's a mistake that we're learning over and over and over again. And we have to have the discussion boldly because we're seeing upticks in crime, which we don't want to see. And we have to be honest about the story behind those numbers. If we're dishonest about the story, the numbers will have a dishonest response. And those numbers are rising, but we have to look at where we were, particularly in New York City. We were at historic, almost unsustainable lows in those crimes, which is great. And now we're going through a global pandemic. And now people are coming out. They were met with aggression when it came to social distancing. Then on top of that, we're at a almost depression level economy right now. We can look back at history and see what happens. And you can put a cop on every corner and we're still gonna see some of the upticks. So what can we do to address the root problems of those crimes without the other kind of problems that come up when we try to over-police all of these problems?
And I mean, the last question that I have for today, you know, as fellow civil servants, I work in the state assembly, you know, you run the Office of the Public Advocate right now. What is the state of the city in relation to, you know, COVID, but also structural racism? And what more would you like to see done to combat structural racism and police brutality? It's a bit of a heavy question.
No, I mean, it's a question of the day. And, you know, we passed a lot of bills. And, you know, I appreciate who you work for supporting those bills. I'm not sure if that's something we mentioned here, who it is, but we passed a lot of bills. And then we get caught with thanking people who were blocking these bills in the first place. And so the reason these bills were available, they didn't create new ones, is because all of these bills had members who had them sponsored, but people like the governor and the mayor refused to allow them to come to their desks to be signed. So we have to thank them, but that's low-hanging fruit. And we don't want the low-hanging fruit anymore. And I remind folks that in Minnesota, many of the reforms that we want to see, they had in that city. And George Floyd still died. And the real question is, what is public safety and how do we redefine it? And if we miss that mark, we wouldn't do what it is that this moment calls for. So when you have the governor saying you can go home now to the protesters, you've won, nothing could be further from the truth. When you have Occupy City Hall right now, as the mayor is basically saying, we're going to miss this opportunity to begin to redefine public safety, nothing could be public from the truth. So what I want to see is an honest discussion about that. I do give the governor some credit for pushing police departments across the state to discuss what policing looks like, or else they don't get funding. But the proof is going to be in the pudding and what they come up with. And it's not just policing. It is public safety in communities that are hit hardest with issues of violence or crime, and how we respond to that.
Yeah, that is really great. Also, there was a recent article, our police forces are being trained in Israel. And Turkey is my motherland and United States is my homeland. And the treatment that the Israeli army is towards Palestinians is almost the same treatment that our police force is doing towards our African American fellow citizens. And there is a great parallel in between. Do you see in the future like these type of educational exchange programs between the government of Israel and our police forces should continue, or we should stop these type of educational exchange or training programs?
There's been a lot of concern about not just Israel, but satellite offices around the world that NYPD has, and is that a place that we need to be spending our money? There's no one that can ignore the threat to New York City in particular. And so NYPD needs to be abreast of things like terrorism, but how much money is being spent and how much oversight is happening. It feels like they're working by themselves and overseeing themselves, and that's a huge problem. And they're also not the FBI or the CIA, so we have to remain that. It's been concerned to a lot of us that things like stop, question, and frisk were taught and cross-taught between Israel and New York, and there has to be a highlighting of that and a discussion if those educational exchanges are harmful or helpful. And I don't know that there's been much sunlight on them. So the first thing I've always agreed is there has to be sunlight and discussion about what's being taught, why, and how much we're spending on it. And is that the best way to move forward for public safety?
Yeah, that's really great. That's all the questions from my side. Really appreciate for joining, and we feel honored with your presence. On behalf of Turkish Americans, I really thank you and really appreciate, and we support you. Like all the answers really resonates with us, with Turkish Americans, and really appreciate it. And I will just give the mic to Brother Mosab, perhaps.
Yeah, I think the last question I wanted to ask, it's a bit of a doozy, but how are you doing? How are you holding up?
I appreciate that. I'm working on being okay. These are some tough times, and I always want to make space for folks to say they're not okay. You know, and so I'm working on that. I have personally been seeing a therapist for about 4.5 years. I try to be very public about that so that people can understand that everybody needs to check and everybody needs somebody to talk to. And it's paying off for a time like this. And so I'm able to navigate and be able to do my job in a way that I may not have been able to if I didn't have access to that. So I'm working on being okay, and I appreciate it. And I hope everybody's doing the same, and we'll be all right, inshallah.
Yes, and I mean, I definitely speak for a lot of people when I say, you know, you're a beacon of strength and integrity in the city. Keep fighting keep fighting the good fight. You know, keep doing what you're doing. You're doing a great job. And I just wanted to close up with a prayer. You know, I ask Allah, the Almighty, to assist and help and guide all of us on the fight for justice, the fight for peace, because peace comes with a strong, heavy, and long fight for justice, because peace comes with justice. And I, you know, ask Allah the Almighty to keep all of us safe and sound during these very turbulent times, and to give us guidance to navigate these tough waters safely. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Peace and blessings, love and light to everyone. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
We appreciate for your joining us. Thank you. Really appreciate it.